the smartest and most evil man in Teyvat. Alright, let's get into it. This is an interesting one to talk about because part of this video is going to be Dottore lore, and part of it's going to be theory and just filling in the blanks because he is an enigma to say the least. And which Dottore are we talking about? We're going to explore all of his different segments, or at least the ones we can pinpoint, as well as where we might see him next. Now, without wasting any time, let's get right to it. Dottore is the second Fatui Harbinger, probably the smartest man of Teyvat, but how did he get to where he is now? And how has he lived this long? Honestly, I don't think the original Dottore is even still alive, but let's start from the beginning. Dottore was recruited by Piero the Jester into the Harbingers, and it is obvious to see why. He's obsessed with creating a god or elevating humans to the level of gods. That is what he cares most about. In his earlier days, he went by Zandik, and for obvious reasons, he was in the Sumeru Academia, being the top of his class and an excellent student. But eventually his curiosity would get the best of him and he would start actually dabbling in these heinous crimes and experiments, even including people, mostly ones sent to Aru village so nobody would even notice they're gone or miss them. He is from Sumeru but was expelled from the academia because of how far he was willing to go in his experiments in the pursuit of knowledge. In his eyes, no knowledge should be off the table, and in a kill or be killed world, it is necessary. No subject is off limits to him. This would have been in the earlier stages of the Fatui organization, and Piero saw nothing but potential in him and recruited him instantly. Probably his best recruitment, as Dottore would be the catalyst for almost everything going on within the Fatui, and would be such a key player in the years to come. He has researched Conria's automatons, researched ways to weaponize forbidden knowledge, the Withering, Elazar, and sought to utilize the power of dreams to elevate humans' cognitive abilities. He also used a little device that was able to immobilize a descender of the Traveler instantly. And make no mistake, our journey would have ended right then and there if he chose it. He shares a deep passion for elevating humanity to the level of gods to level the playing field. Pantalone, the ninth Harbinger, also shares this passion, which is why they work and collab on a lot of different projects. And Pantalone is probably funding everything Dottore does. As if this guy wasn't astronomically dangerous already, he befriends the richest man in Teyvat. We have no idea when he was recruited to the Fatui, but he was recruited by Piero, the first Harbinger and now the director. And because he is the second Harbinger, and because we know he can create segments and preserve his life, I'm assuming that he was probably one of the first recruited almost 500 years ago after he was expelled from the academia. This is a speculation but an educated guess. Anything in the Fatui organization as well as the fellow Harbingers involving scientific enhancements, research, and upgrades, you can be damn sure he's involved. He played a huge part in sabotaging Inazuma in order to gain the trust and recruitment of the balladeer Scaramouche, which also greatly enhanced not only his research, but was able to be a catalyst for his segment research in making clones of himself, taking what a god like the Raiden Shogun did, and even possibly making improvements on it. Everything that Dottore does is experience, an experiment, knowledge, a lesson learned. There's no such thing as failure to him. Everything that he does is one step closer to achieving his goal. We talked about Vanessa in a recent video, how she was the first Grandmaster of Mondstadt. She defeated Ursa the Drake, changed the landscape of Mondstadt, and is one of the most renowned and famous warriors in all of Mondstadt history. She wasn't able to kill Ursa the Drake, but she was able to defeat it and save all of Mondstadt from the aristocracy with the help of Barbados. Just to put in perspective, that is one of Mondstadt's greatest heroes we're talking about, who ended up becoming the Falcon of the West, ascending to godhood. Dottore, one of his segments, this segment from the manga, casually rolled up in Mondstadt, effortlessly killed Ursa the Drake. Just to put in perspective how strong he is, and we're only talking about one specific segment. And the only reason he even bothered to do this was so that he could set up shop in Mondstadt, improve their diplomatic relations, and so that Mondstadt would owe him a favor. And that is just one segment. If you watched my last video going over gods and what they actually mean in Teyvat and how the criteria seems to be more of a corrupt government than any sort of divine, all-righteous being to guide humanity, I can understand the means to the end of leveling the playing field. But the way that he does it is completely evil. That being said, make no mistake, he has saved the best enhancements and upgrades for himself. he is the second Fatui Harbinger, and as Nahida states, his power rivals that of gods. Not only does this allow him to pretty much do whatever he wants wherever he is in Teyvat, but it also means that he is smart enough to make sure any experiments or anyone that gets in his way of his research, he can deal with personally. And this isn't even taking into account the fact that he's already created segments of himself that are probably just as strong, if not very close. In Child's first story quest, we've seen that he set up a lab in Liyue, experimenting on ruin guards and Conria tech. He is a mastermind of all technology, whether it be engineering, biology, chemistry, but the methods that he chooses to do it, as we see an abandoned hospital in Sumeru Desert where he experimented on people. Like I said, his grand plan and his overarching goals are understandable to fill the gap in the disparity between gods, who really don't have any meaning in Teyvat, which we discussed, and humans, leveling out the playing field. But his pursuit of research often comes at the torture and pain of others. Nothing is off limits to him, and we're only talking about one segment. He could possibly have a segment in every single nation in Teyvat. Now we'll get into how he destroyed his segments in a second, but we're talking about right now before his quest with Nahida, taking the Gnosis. He murdered people in Inazuma to get what he wanted. In Mondstadt, he turned one of his friends and assistants into a machine. And Dottore, being such a genius, using his segments in tandem with each other, he can create experiments, do research in every nation in Teyvat simultaneously. He can be in multiple places at once. We don't even know how many segments there are. There could be dozens. But, hinted by Columbina, they all seem to be at different points in his life, which means the original Dottore could have been dead many years ago. Hundreds of years ago.
I must say, you're looking very young today, Doctor.
You know very well that I do not take that as a compliment.
So, where's the segment in the prime of his life, then?
He's busy with a little experiment in blasphemy.
And he just keeps creating new clones of himself to keep living on. That is why she teases in the Fatui trailer where the segment in the prime of his life is, and that he's looking very young today. There are probably Dottores in every single age group all across Teyvat. In Sumeru's Archon quest, he was able to infiltrate the academia and manipulate the sages who have the final say in mostly everything that goes on within it, and was able to agree upon turning Scaramouche into a man-made god, and weaponizing everyone's disappointment in Lesser Lord Kusanali, and using misinformation along with the Akasha system to manipulate everybody. We also know for a fact there was 2 different segments of him at least in Sumeru, as we see him leave, but he also never left. We're not sure which one was at the Irminsul foreshadowing with the tree burning, but I'm assuming that the original Dottore, or the one that's most in charge, is the one in the prime of his life, who is the one we saw converse with Lesser Lord Kusanali at the end of the Archon quest, where he immobilizes the traveler and states that even though it failed, it was good research, and probably this research into a man-made god Scaramouche was the catalyst for his future projects, possibly with resurrecting the third Descender. We'll get into that in a second. But he was also shown to have great knowledge about forbidden knowledge, the false sky, and what is really going on across Teyvat with Celestia and everything. Stuff that even Lesser Lord Kusanali, the god of wisdom, did not know. Not too many people in Teyvat can share knowledge that even the god of wisdom doesn't even know. As evil as this man is, I can't help but admire him. And Lesser Lord Kusanali agrees to give him both the Electro and the Dendrognosis if he does 2 things: share this knowledge and destroy his other segments, leading me to believe this segment that we see here must be either the original, maybe he didn't die, he was able to preserve himself for all these years, or this is the prime segment, and there always is a prime segment that can actually be the basis or the benchmark, because he was able to destroy every other segment simultaneously in that moment. And I think the one we hear at the end is the one that we saw in the manga in Mondstadt.
What a ridiculous decision! You can't be serious!
How could I have been so short-sighted?
You think this is the end? Wait, I'll have
You'll make
good
this
riddance.
moment count.
You will regret this.
He has slightly more dialogue than the rest. And from here, we haven't really seen the Doctor since. But do I think his segments are all gone? And even if they were, there is nothing stopping him from creating more. The fact that this man is the second Harbinger in strength alone, not even taking into account his intellect, the fact that there's multiple versions of him and probably being more created means that you could possibly be fighting the second Harbinger half a dozen times, all across Teyvat. How do you beat somebody like that? He's everywhere, and you never know what he's doing because he's so methodical and intelligent. He's so smart. He infiltrated Inazuma disguised as a Fontaine engineer. So how can anyone in Teyvat, no matter what nation you're from, ever rest easy? He could be anywhere, and all at the same time. He always has a backup plan to his backup plan. There's multiple versions of himself, maybe even more, and I do think that the final version or transformation of Dottore will be like a Jekyll Mr. Hyde. Like I said, he'll save his best experiments for himself. He wants to ensure that he's not just some laboratory scientist, and that if an experiment gets out of hand, he can deal with it himself. Obviously, somebody enhancing humans, doing heinous experiments and evil acts, should be able to deal with the consequences themselves. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up to fail. And it would not surprise me in the slightest if he's working together with the House of the Hearth to collect orphans and experiment on them as well. Because this man will do evil, slaughter people, dissect, poke, and experiment with anyone and anything in order to gain the slightest bit of knowledge. That is terrifying. And the only true threat that poses to him is himself, ironically. Like we've seen, he destroyed all of his other segments. I have no doubt in my mind, he's way too smart to do this without having a backup plan, either having more segments stashed away, or simply could make more. But ultimately, I think he's going to be his own destruction. One segment will rebel or turn face, and that'll probably be the playable segment that we get. Dottore is an interesting character because he can be both good and evil simultaneously. Also, I like that, unlike most stories that involve characters that can clone themselves, he isn't just mindless and competing with himself to see who's going to be the original surviving segment or clone. He only kills his clones because it is necessary for their ultimate goal to gain a gnosis. And he was able to bag 2 of them at once. So he did not kill his segments out of some jealousy or power struggle. It was necessary in that moment. Otherwise he would not have done it. That suggests to me that Dottore and all of his clones, they all worked together relatively decently at the least. It was the most necessary thing to do at that moment. He even admits that he could easily kill Nahida himself, and the discrepancy in their strength wouldn't stop him. But the reason that he doesn't is because, despite how evil he is, he respects critical thinking and knowledge and intelligence. That is why he respects the God of Wisdom, even if she's a little bit pathetic and weak in his eyes. She's still the God of Wisdom, and he respects wisdom and knowledge above all else. That is pretty well all we know about Dottore that's concrete. As far as when we'll see him next, I predict Natlan. We are going to get our last Gnosis, the Pyro-Gnosis in Natlan, and because now we know they're the remains of the third Descender, and resurrection is the theme around Natlan already teased, there is literally nobody in Teyvat better suited for this process. And Dottore's story has not concluded. He's a high-ranking Harbinger, and if the captain's already going to be there, why not have Dottore as well? We usually get more than one Harbinger in a region anyway, so that is where I predict seeing him next, and possibly one of his segments will defect in order to be playable. That's what I predict, because this man is just too evil to have a redeeming arc in my opinion. Scaramouche murdered some samurai, blacksmiths and whatnot, but you can see why he did it, and he's been manipulated his entire life and had mommy issues. There's at least a reason to it. He wasn't always inherently evil. You know, he wanted a relationships and he was always just betrayed and he just gave up on the world. And he was being manipulated this whole time by Dottore himself. Whereas Dottore has always been evil. His goal's always clear and concise. He wants to level the playing field. He despises Celestia and the gods of any kind, but he'll go way too far in the name of those experiments. But that is going to conclude this video. Thank you for watching. Dottore is definitely one of the most interesting characters in Teyvat, because there is so many possibilities. The fact that he knows everything with the false sky, Irminsul, forbidden knowledge, as well as all the things he's already able to do, I am genuinely curious to see how his story unfolds. I will be releasing another poll with more biographies, but until then, we will see you all in the next one. Later.